Well, it looks like we're live now. We've got some
Yeah.
folks joining in. Come
Hey,
on in,
everybody.
folks. Hey, it's nice to see y'all.
Okay, sweetie, maybe we could. This is my little guy, Sasha. He's homesick today, but they're about to go for a walk. And
Oh, good. Folks are coming in.
yeah. Okay. Bye, buddy. Bye, buddy. Say goodbye.
Bye, hon.
My buddy.
Bye,
Bye,
buddy.
buddy.
Bye, buddy. Bye, buddy. Okay. Bye, kitty. Thanks, sweetie. Okay, bye, buddy. Let's see you soon. Yeah, I'm excited to do this with you. Oh, hold
Yeah,
on.
thanks
You
for
want? You want?
coming in.
Take your rocker. It's his otter. Okay. So, pardon me. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm excited to chat about this and yeah, just saying we got this crazy. We're lucky just for the winter. We rented this home with this view on the water, and we're just outside of Vancouver, so we're very happy here, honestly. It's so relaxing.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad. Well, I tell you what, I'm gonna tell folks a little bit about what Cave of the Heart is.
Uh-huh.
Introduce them in case they don't know you. I have a hunch that a lot of folks are gonna recognize your name. But this is Cave of the Heart. This is a conversation series about those quiet but pivotal moments between like knowing you have something to say and daring to say it out loud. So I just think that there's a lot to explore around trust in your ideas and your timing, and most of all in yourself. And so, what I'm hopeful today that I know Jeff well enough to know that we're not shallow under the pool, folks. We're ready to dive in deep. So, we're going to talk about like what is inner authority and what's the permission to tell the truth. Like, where do we even find that? And so, for those of y'all who don't know, I'm talking to Jeff Warren. He's a meditation teacher, author, and probably the voice you might have heard in the Calm app. And I'm
One of
so
them.
thankful. Yeah, one of them. But he has a rare way of making presence and uncertainty feel part of the package deal in life. And I'm really, really grateful to have this conversation today. So, welcome. It's so nice to see everybody joining. And these are unscripted conversations. We've kind of talked about what we're going to explore, but the whole idea here is that you all can chime in throughout the conversation, and we're going to try and leave room to answer questions at the end. But ultimately, we are practicing presence together because it's in those spaces where we go, "Ooh, can I say that? Can I actually express that? Can I say these things out loud?" That crosses over a lot into my work as a publishing strategist and trying to help people find that voice to bring forward in their work. So thanks, Jeff. Thanks
No,
for being here.
I appreciate the opportunity. I think it's really great what you're doing, and I loved reading a little bit about your backstory and the autism, and that feels very relevant for me, the neurodivergence piece, and it's fun to think about. You sent a few questions ahead of time, and it was like, okay, I haven't really thought about these things ever, just about voice and creativity, and I mean, certainly I think about creativity, but about my story with that, and I think it's going to be fun. So appreciate the invitation.
Thanks. Well, I think folks want to talk about like trust and permission. Like the first place my mind or my natural curiosity has gone in the last several years is like what you were like as a child, because I feel like permission is planted at such a young age. And so I love opening the door to just hear from folks like you. What were you like as a child? Like, were you a chatterbox? Were you quiet? Like, take us to 5-year-old Jeff and like, what's he doing and talking about and exploring?
Well, he's hyperactive. I'll tell you
He's
that.
hyperactive.
There's pictures of me at that age and younger with a leash, like they had me in a harness.
Oh,
Um,
Lord.
it's interesting reflecting on this. Like I, I didn't talk that much. Or rather, I was very excitable and speaking a lot, but the message was that it was too much. Probably I complained a lot. I was a sensitive little kid and had a lot of internal challenges, and I didn't feel I wasn't sure how to. The memory I have very vividly is being tr- like trying to understand the all these incredible complexities and systems of the world, feeling like I was starting to understand them, but having no clue how to find the words for it. And this sense of just like not being able to find the words, and just like that, I think is a big feeling in my childhood. It was not being particularly chatty, not being able to find the words. And then when I was expressing myself, it was usually some emotional thing that was not really well received. Um, so I don't know if that's kind of what you're asking about, but that would be the. And then I was also just like frenetic. Like my energy was very intense, and so I think my a lot of my expression just came out through how my body was.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So when you it's interesting because you say it was very frenetic, but you weren't speaking. So were you just like building
probably
around you?
just
Were you working with
whining.
your hands? What?
I mean, mostly whining and complaining and lashing out and attacking my brother. But yeah, a lot of channeling, building the things with my hands, and a lot of drawing, um, and it's relevant because I think that it's like you say, the things that happen when you're young, they're so formative, and I think that the feeling of there being a block and there being like a damned sense of energy building and building and building. Later, when creativity did start to come more, I've often reflected on this that there was a kind of compulsive quality to it, and I'm bipolar, so there is a pressured speech part of bipolar, a kind of compulsive, not be able to, can't turn off the creativity, can't turn off the expressing that is almost deranged. And so maybe even getting to that early on, like it's not. I don't see creativity itself only in these purely positive times. I mean, I do see it as part of life, but I can also see the deranged side of it. And I think sometimes I wonder if it related to that feeling of like, oh, I have so much I want. I'm not allowed to express what's here. And then when I finally did express it, I kind of like overdid it, in
Yeah.
some ways.
Yeah. And like when you did try to like express it, because I relate a lot to like this pressure cooker of I've been reading a lot about how like neurodivergent people don't think in linear fashion. We think in very like constellations. And when you're
Right.
talking, I feel like I was like, oh, it's the constellations all colliding and then trying to come out. And the response we get when we're younger really does shape us. So like was there a point where people started listening, even if it wasn't your caretakers? Like, where you started to get, I guess, maybe like a feedback loop that was different? Or was it mostly like, come on, Jeff, be quiet. We're trying to sit at the table.
Yeah, it
Just,
was mostly well, there was a turning point, but early on it was like, no, this is weird. This is not. In fact, and I have a vivid memory of being taken to a child psychologist. I was a lot of when I was like 8 or something, and because I was a very difficult kid, and not and the them and then the child psychologist asking me all these questions and me not being able to really articulate what was going on with me, and then seeing him put words in my mouth to my parents describing this is what's up with your kid, totally unjustly. And I remember being
mm,
so outraged and so like having my voice just being so like, what the fuck,
yeah,
like I can't, but also it was partly my fault. Like I couldn't get the words out. So I think there was this sense of being blocked or frozen that affected me socially and that affected my relationship with my family. And then I can remember like this grade 7 teacher when I was about 12 or 13. I had been in French immersion and I had been, sort of labeled a difficult kid, and I didn't particularly excel in school or anything. But then as soon as I got into English school, all of a sudden my language abilities really took off, and this teacher identified that, and I mean, I'd always been a big reader, but he really was able to see. Mr. Stevenson, his name was. Oh yeah, you actually have a gift in the writing part here, like I'm writing essays, and that really was like, oh, you mean I have I can, there's something here. Like I have all this reading and all this constellation thinking of seeing so much is now starting to find a way to be channeled a little bit. And that did change things. Although even then there's more to say about that because I think you end up
yeah,
like in the reading, even I was doing, and then later you internalize a set of norms around what you think the right kind of expression is.
yeah,
And that's something to whole talk about because there was definitely some stuff that got loaded in on me as like, oh, you're allowed to talk in this way. If you're gonna express, it has to be in this way and this way only.
yeah. Did you say what age you were when he
Well, that
came into your
was
life?
13 or something like that.
13? It's a good age. It's a good age. Did you find? I'm curious now about if you felt that there was any difference between being able to express uh, silently like writing down versus auditory. I know I've learned so much
Yes.
about language processing and how it's just such a thing inside neurodiversity we don't really understand well enough. And so when you say something unlocked, like I wondered, like, did he pull you into a medium where it felt different at all? Just curious.
Yeah, those are a really important question, I think, for everybody in a way. It's like finding your medium.
Yeah.
I think it was like that. I think it was, I guess I had written a little bit, but it unlocking that I could express myself in a written way, because that I had more control over, and that I could take my time. I could redo it and rework it, and that was a revelation. That confidence in the writing came before it ever came in speaking, and that has continued to evolve. There was a period where I really, I've had crushes on different kinds of writers over the eras, and that have given me that have begun to orient me to these different modes of expression, from the early writing and short stories through to creative nonfiction writing, and then the kind of writing I do now is even very different than that. And so I could talk about that evolution, because it's like you said, each era in my life I've been clear about there's a different medium that's been more appropriate to expressing myself. And I never thought I'd be expressing myself in the guided meditation, especially since it's completely 180 degrees opposite of where I was before, which was more the kind of journalistic, creative nonfiction. It's
Yeah.
kind of like it's there. Those are such different modes, and one is literally the latter is sort of ridiculed by the former in some ways. So it's just funny. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I definitely relate with that because I have a journalism background as well. And when I came into the meditation space and just as a student, I recognized that like the cadence here is very different. The way that they express authority is very different. And the way that that teachers have a posture from a completely different voice. I was like, I don't know how they access that. Like it's so different. And I don't know, we might be able to dive into that some more, but I'm curious if you could say, like, one person in your childhood, like, modeled that self-expression, is there anybody who stands out for you like that? And then we might ask for adulthood as well.
Um, yeah, it's a great question. I mean, it's all no,
No.
no, because I
It
didn't.
probably it's probably an
Yeah,
amalgamation
no,
that turned into, like, the sound of Jeff in his head and having
yeah,
the ability.
it must have been, because I didn't really have any mentors for creative people when I was young. My parents are lovely, but they're not. That's not their. They're more. My dad's more engineering. My mom's a very hilarious person, but they wouldn't. Neither would identify as sort of being creative. And it was all just reading my stories. It was reading fantasy and science fiction books that gave me the first sense of possibilities. And then the revelations really started happening when I started getting more into. In fact, I would say it was probably the first big revelation, probably like Annie Dillard, reading Annie Dillard when I was 18, and reading Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, and realizing that you could express your personality in writing that was also addressing kind of philosophical issues and issues around existence and self-consciousness and what it meant to have a mind. And there's a way she wrote about that. I mean, there's that book in particular had a kind of nature mysticism writing too, but she really it was like, oh, you mean it's okay to be like wondering about these existential things? You mean it's okay to express that in a voice that's true to her? And that book really, and then American Childhood, which I read right after that, which is all about the process of childhood consciousness moving into adulthood. And as like I recognized all of a sudden that I'd been inside this very kind of tortured, self-conscious existential process, I now could see it as a spiritual process that I had no language for in the peers around me. And this was when reading her books were, wow, that was like a big breakthrough. And then Ursula Le Guin's books, yeah, those are, and then, but not just, but also in the way that the honesty with who they are, the real, the personality pouring through that, I think that really unlocked something. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I read an editor the other day that said that he likes when authors look him straight in the eye. And I was like, "Oh, I think that's different for every person, but that honesty that you're describing there, it sounds like it was looking right at you and saying, 'Hey, it's okay to speak up.'" Well, the reason I'm always interested in, like, childhood expression is because I feel like it's a pattern I've been tracking for a while that like how people find their creative sparks in adulthood. There's usually like echoes sometimes. Sometimes not. If there's not, I'm totally down for them to say like, yeah, I was like this when I was younger, but now I'm completely different and none of that none of that matters. But I'm just kind of curious about like what do your creative sparks look like now? Like how do you when they show up, like how do you relate to the idea of having an intuition about what to do next?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't think I think it's taken me until pretty late in my adulthood to realize how central that question is, because it's
Mm.
not just your creative impulses, it's maybe there's no difference. Like your creative impulse, I mean, what I mean is like there's your creative impulses in the creative work you're doing, and then there's your creative impulses in the life you're leading. And I think
Yeah.
I've when I was younger, I separated those into different things, and now I really see them as being part of a single stream. That the living of life itself is kind of fundamentally creative, and when I get and the meditation is so supportive in that because it's about for me getting quiet to get underneath all the noise so that that signal is clear and that serves both my creative writing and it serves how I'm living. So for the just as an example, like for the longest, so I became a journalist and I was very invested in a certain kind of way of expressing myself, from reading lots of book reviews and being a big, I was sort of in the literary nonfiction world. I wrote a book in that mode and I had won a couple awards for my writing in that mode. And it's a beautiful mode, but it's a very constrained mode, even though there's, the mode, the whole mode itself had a kind of like the first person, it developed into more and more space for first person stuff, but it was also very much like, being this sort of lightly held expert that has a light overview of the situation, who breezily moves through scenarios and like mixes a little bit of first person and with some good narrative. And it has a whole mode. And I loved it. And I loved learning about it. But there came a point in my life when it was like, this is no longer entirely the mode I want to be communicating in. And yet I didn't know what the new mode was or what the new form of
Mm.
creativity was. And it just so trusting that quiet, it's like that it's that quiet that allowed me to sort of begin to trust these different and to be able to bungle around in these new in whether it was guided meditations or writing about kind of spiritual issues and things that I hadn't really explicitly wrote about before. And um so yeah, and so that was like understanding and beginning to trust that is hard because often you're trying to understand something where you have no evidence that it's going to work out at all. In fact, it
Yeah.
might seem completely counterintuitive to any reasonable decision, I mean, particularly when you've got a level of success at a certain area of your life, and and yet that's what it was telling me, and I was like very much resisting it for a long time. And But then when I finally went with it, it was like the dams open up and all of a sudden there's so much more free flow and there's not just free flow in your internal expression but it almost seems as though free flow in terms of the way the opportunities that are presenting themselves through life almost like life itself wanted to show you this
Yeah.
and it was just
Yeah.
like waiting for you like come on get it together buddy and you're just like so constipated with your own existential flow that you're not
Yeah.
surrendering to it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think you're describing something that I've heard in just other places where journalists go from being up here to being coming from here. And like how do they
Yes.
blend that? It's because it is certainly voice for sure. Like there's a voice and a cadence, but like are you allowed to join the story too? Is what I feel like there people have asked
Yes.
me before. Is there can you think of an example of like when you knew like I'm letting this voice in on this piece, or was it a book or an interview? Can you recall where you if there was a knot in your chest, like I'm gonna do this and I'm gonna go for it?
Yeah, well, yeah, it was there was a big moment like that happened when I was working on this book with Dan Harris, Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics, and I had no problem being creative around explaining things, being the kind of like competent, trustworthy explainer narrator, which I actually learned from meditation is a voice in my head. That's what I liked about nonfiction writing. That's what I liked about reading good critics. It was like the sense of an authority who could make everything comprehensible and okay. Like the New Yorker writer who has this sort of like wears their authority lightly and this is how it
Mhm.
is kind of a vibe. And thinking that's what and then, and so, because what happens is you get to a point where you realize that's all kind of bullshit. Nobody knows really how it is. All it
Yeah.
is just adopting a set of norms and a culture around how something is. And so I'd always, it's been easy to get into that voice and where I was, but I got a very dramatic challenge of it when in writing that book, there was a lot of challenges between, there was some challenges between Dan and I around my ADHD and my process and how I was throwing a spanner in the works of his timeline and stressing him out by going into these crazy ADHD rants and long, complicated things. And then the realization that both Dan and I had was we should make this part of the book and talk about it. And at that point, I had talked about being ADHD in this light way. I mean, I have a diagnosis and everything, but I had never been really um, I hadn't really described the real time experience of it yet, and I'd always kind of made light of it. And this was like all of a sudden the suffering and challenge of it and the inconvenience to other people of it was happening. Could we make that part of the story? And so it forced me to drop into a level of honesty about my internal process that I had never been there publicly. And it was very scary because there's so much taboo around this. I mean, this was 8 years ago now. There's a lot less taboo. It's still there. But I was like, I didn't know how it would be quite received, um, and even less so with the bipolar, which is even if there's a notch more serious in the kind of in the mental health diagnosis, it's like, oh, now bipolar is getting into really being crazy. You know,
Right.
ADHD is mental health challenge. Bipolar is like, yeah, there's a lot of stigma around it, and that I learned about that right after that. That was like a few years later, and then I had, okay, now I got to come out about that. So there's that part of it, but there's like the being coming out about what's true for you, then there's being coming out as what is the true expression of that creatively. And that's different. Like I have my overlay of how I should be as a writer, and I know what sounds good. I know how to write an article that sounds like all those other modes. Sorry for the screams in the background. But do I know how to be raw and real from the place of my the genuineness of being bipolar, or the genuineness of being ADHD? That was new. And it turns out meditation, the guided meditation, is a beautiful framework for that in certain ways, which is you might not expect. And the honest truth about speaking to your experience of that spiritual practice invites at its deepest and most authentic level is a good medium for that. So I was very lucky to have found myself there. Then and now I could, if I hadn't had that, I don't know what I would have done. I probably just would have kept the mask going the way so many of us
Mm.
do.
Mm. So, so you felt like your mask came off in the writing of that book and with the people around you.
And
That's
has come
so,
off more and more since.
yeah. It's such an interesting, like, I'm kind of struck by the fact that you were surrounded by people who, like, were absorbing you and that you had this choice of whether or not to put it back up and to try to, like, clamp it down. And instead, I don't, why do you think you were able to relax into the possibility of it just being part of the book? Because I think if
Oh,
anyone's who's neurodivergent, they know that feeling of saying, "I'm gonna let the mask come off a little more, and a little more,
yeah.
and a little more."
Well, I mean, uh, there's no question that that is the direction of a working spiritual practice in some way, or at least a meditation practice. Like that is the equanimity training in a way. It's like it really is a training in learning to be ever more okay with ever more of who you are, and moving into those shadowy corners of yourself. And whether that gets ever transmitted into something that's coming out publicly is a different matter. It may or may not, but certainly it does. You hear this from a lot of people, like this ever deeper permission to be themselves. So I think it's in line with the general trajectory of what I was, um, of how I was changing through my practice. It just was accelerated because of those, because I was suddenly I was in this public eye and I had an obligation or responsibility to my co-author. So it was like it forced the issue in a way that I probably would have been a little slower on the inside from. Um, and the other part that was so nerve-wracking about it is your true self is messy. Your true self is not the
Yeah.
perfect sculpted TED talk. It's not the perfect essay. It's like it's uncomfortable making. It's messy. It's like you're saying the wrong thing. You're being too much. You're putting people off. You're being too angry or intense, or you're not finding the words. You're there in public with a spotlight to say something, and guess what's happening? Nothing is coming out of your mouth, or you don't know what to say, or the random shit is coming out, or the first 10 minutes of this conversation where I didn't even know what I was going to say or talking about happens. It's not the slick, perfectly produced person. And in our era of everything, people wanting that to a degree, although there's also a craving for people not wanting that, that it feels hard to do that in an Instagram era, but maybe it's becoming more easy to do it if there's something else that's coming through in the culture. And I feel like there is. I feel like there's a level of candidness and honesty that is moving through that is emerging in the culture. Maybe it's already here. I don't know. I'm not a commentator on any of that because what do I know about social media? I don't even go on it except for this. Yeah.
Well, it's I sense that too. I sense that when I came onto Substack in 2022, that people were responding to honesty in a way that I had never been able to grasp on social media, and there could have been some social layers to that that had just never quite clicked for me. But I've only found that pattern to sort of increase the longer I'm on here, these last 3 years. That um, the and it's not so much that the bizarre thing lifts on Substack, but it's this the crazy raw, like deepest thing that someone just had to follow. It just blossoms, and I just see that again and again, and I'm
Yeah, that is
like
amazing.
that's encouraging for people who maybe don't have the polished voice that they think they have to in order to be heard in the world or in a publication or in a book, however that is. But that source is available to all of us.
Mm.
And I don't know, that's encouraging to me. I'm curious also. I'm curious about, so you had this experience, you were working with this immediacy of your experience on a book team. How has that translated? Do you find those moments in publishing your newsletter? Because you have a great newsletter, Homebase with Jeff.com. I wrote it down. Yeah. Um,
Mm.
how do you find that there? Like, do you find
Yeah.
that dynamic with your newsletter?
Yeah, well, so the thing I figured out was all I need to do is just be honest about my experience. And because I was having so much challenge, because I would have breakthroughs and challenges so quickly on account of being ADHD and bipolar, my cycle was very, very fast. I just found that I could make lots of meditations. I could just notice what was happening with me, see where I get hung up, see what helped, and then create a little meditation about it. Then do and then have a good thing happen, and then see what was that good thing was, and make a meditation about that. I would just constantly be turning over my own experience for material, and it was because I had created this habit of publishing from earlier in my journalistic career. It just worked very well, and that's why I'd been so productive. And so I was working with Calm and 10% Happy, and I was just like churning out multiple meditations a week. But it didn't feel like churning; it felt like really fun
Work.
for me, and it was really
Yeah.
like and then I had an editor I would work with. But the challenge was, can I actually be dead honest about what the nature of this challenge is? And you have to do that. You got to get under the cliche layer. Like you have your first layer of
Yeah.
what you think it is, but it's not necessarily what it is, and you have to pause and kind of almost right through it and go, oh, there's something else deeper here. Can I speak to what that thing is? And then the added thing for me is, how can I speak to that in a way that's relatable to the most number of people? Like, so what is the germ of what's kind of universal here? Or how do I frame it? Even if you're having a different experience of it, you could relate to it somehow. And that then, so that is, so just like, that's what I would do for these meditations. That's kind of what I try to do with Substack, although that's changing too. Substack's also, because there's so much fun audio, I like to kind of use it as a kind of fun library of auditory curiosities, contemplative auditory curiosities, and that's there too. And um, yeah, so that I would say that was something that started to happen, and that felt really good. That's what I mean about finding your right medium. You're like, and then how strange to be in this medium. It's like, for me, it's like I still have a voice that's like, what are you doing, really? You're making guided meditations. It's like the equivalent of like Hallmark cards. Like, it's like, what, I had this whole
What
idea
a
I was going to be
pun.
writing these rigorous tomes, like these 500-page books that were going to appeal to the intellectual about the nature of consciousness. And I wrote one like that and nobody read it. And now I've got a much broader platform writing about the importance of self-compassion, which is true indeed. But it seems like I still have a part of me going like, that's not real writing. But I know it is.
Yeah.
But you know,
Yeah. Well, so we've been talking about like visibility, and I love how much we've talked about neurodivergence and how visibility has layers to it. But like as a public figure who's written a book with Dan Harris, you're on the Calm app, you've got listeners who really trust you. How do you stay visible and nourish yourself creatively to make sure that you're not just on that constant spitting out of things of content?
that's that that is the challenge. I mean, I don't know how other writers do it on Substack. I'd be curious for you, but I think the first 2 years, or first year and a half of having the Substack was like I'm running a magazine and I have to publish every week, and it was like I did feel like I was not spitting out and not getting enough time and space for my own bigger creative projects. It's like because it's the small doing okay, I'm creating these small little creative things, and that becomes my whole creative world, and I know I have bigger things I want to do. So it took a while to kind of get into that rhythm. And I think that I'm at the point where now I'm kind of trying to pivot a bit with the Substack so that it's less like I have to produce this new creative thing every week and more like, how can I use this to capture the real life of what's happening to me? And since I am doing, like, for example, we're doing this chat about creativity, maybe I'll take this and it'll become a post, or I take a bit of audio from a retreat I just did that I thought was that something that happened that was particularly moving or clear, and I'll take that, and you know what I mean. So it's more like um, the creativity of your life unfolding. Can it capture that and be supportive for other people, and then give me enough space so I can do the bigger creative things that I want to do? And but I think that balance is really hard, and I always wonder about that too. I wonder what you've heard from other. I got to ask you that. Like, what have you figured out about that, and what have you heard from other Substack writers? Because truly, I don't know how one does it without it consuming everything, because it's a lot of work.
Yeah, well, I definitely think it's different whether you're fully solo or if you have like someone you can contract out with to help fill in your gaps. Whether your gap is like admin, whether your gap is like the design, whether like you're kind of filling in those
I do
gaps.
have
And
some of that.
as you're talking, like what I ultimately think that like each person who comes into Substack has to learn is like the art of restraint,
Mm,
because it can that hamster wheel can spin, 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 spin really fast,
yeah,
and then just kind of slide you out onto the onto the ice. You're just kind of twirling for a while, and so everything that I've observed is that there's this beginning space where you have to decide if you like the way the hamster wheel feels. And if not, you kind of go, okay, I'm going to bring in the right kind of restraint that I need to know, like, if I don't let myself plan at least a little bit, I won't have anything to give by November. Like if and I think there's an element here of like trust between your readership and like learning that the hamster wheel ultimately won't nourish them either. Like you won't be pulling something out that's
yeah,
cool for them. And so I'm not super interested in like formulas and boxes, but I do think containment matters here and knowing
oh,
your own
big time.
containment. So um I think like for me, I know like once I reach a certain size, I know what I'm going to outsource to create more space so that I can write my book. I'm like,
Yeah,
and I feel like you kind of described that too. Is like there's a certain creative bargaining that you have to do between what you feel really called to do, what the people you're here to serve now, and then like what's coming on the horizon. And so, I don't know if that
yeah.
answers your question.
It does. That's a really wonderful. That's very helpful, and I like the what you said about containment because it's so freaking important in everything.
Yeah,
For any creative structure to have containment, and so there's two things that kind of come up to mind. Pardon me for all the background noise. That's my little guy who's
really fun.
he's he's talk about containment. This would be a dramatic example of the absolute impossibility of total containment. But um, I well, so there's two things I wanted to riff a little bit about the importance of containment in the creative process, and
Yeah,
especially
yeah.
when you're kind of channeling and trusting that, because there's a lot of there's lots to say about that and ways in which that doesn't happen and maybe should do more. But the first part, in terms of as it relates to Substack, um, I I think I also had a I've been very clear that in a way that what I want to do with my Substack is it's going in a slightly different direction. Like I don't want to be writing in the kind of world of competitive great hot take nonfiction posts, so it's not so much a forum for my writing, although it can be sometimes. It really is, for me, it's a place where I can offer the signal of support for people to practice, and what that looks like. Whether it's like the every Friday a new meditation, and then some prompts in the writing that might support that. Every Sunday night, my community practice thing, which is going to be in Substack, maybe another spontaneous one. This thing, like I'm really thinking a lot about, okay, what is the signal of support, in a sense, the containment that I need as a practitioner in my life to keep the sanity of these practices, that people who are drawn to my community need to keep the sanity of the practices. And can this Substack be that rhythm, this rhythm of practice, this rhythm of
Mhm.
containment? And that rhythm is more important to me than any fireworks in the writing. It's like the steadiness and the reliability of the guided meditation, the sense of the steady signal, because that is a kind of containment, and that is a different ambition for Substack than I'm sure it was intended for. Although I like how Substack it's got a loose enough structure that people are finding new creative ways of using it, different writers and different creators. I like that fact that it's expanding. I know some creative writers don't like that, but so that was one thing. And then there was
Yeah.
the second part about creativity itself, but I don't know if that was a useful framing for you or something that came up around that.
Yeah. No, I think I'm processing. Um, my I'm so I've got like, so here's what happens. I get punches of words and I have to figure out what they're trying to say because they're not making a sentence right now. They're just like popping at me.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. I I see this picture of like you have to love the containment. Like what you were just describing is that the containment has to actually help you with the thing you're wanting
Yes.
to do. And I think that knowing the right kind of pressure for yourself is really important. And I think there's just not I like that there's not one magical formula for publications on Substack. I think that's what makes this kind of magical. I think you and I have talked about this. Like, there are a few barriers that you can put into your publication that might make it hard for readers, just from a digital audience experience perspective. And so, just being mindful of those and how you experiment with your readership. I think there's just a consideration for what the person's experiencing in their inbox. But outside of that, I think the
Definitely.
the constraint doesn't serve anybody involved, like constraint versus containment. So I don't know if I captured that right. I had a bunch of pops in my head really quick there. So um um but yeah, I guess I'm curious. So we've talked a lot about your neurodivergence, and I think that there's something that I don't think I've ever talked about, but like that I have a lot of neurodivergent readers in my newsletter, and I don't uh I have never felt comfortable platforming it as like this is a place where I help neurodivergent people, but like the way that we talk about creativity and acceptance, people are like, this helped me because I always struggle with this with ADHD. And I was like, oh, I never thought of it that way. Um, but I also feel like the need to not be contained and simmered down is also a universal, like human desire. Maybe we just feel it more brightly, um, and push against that containment. But I guess now, like we talked about your Substack and how you kind of work with that space. Do you Um, what works well about it for you? What does your container how does that work well for you?
It works well to um to have a forum where you can be making sense of life.
Mhm.
Where and otherwise I would be making sense of it in my head, which I still am endlessly doing, and there's always like the things I'm trying to make sense of are kind of like months ahead of what I'm expressing in a way back here. It's like there's this long gap between the things, what you're able to speak about with confidence ish, and then versus what you're actually not sure about and still working out. And there's like this moving front. And so for
Yeah.
me, it's sort of like I get to consolidate certain thoughts about what I think the nature of life is and how to get through this life, which is really the subject, like what I've learned about how to get through this life. Not what I've learned about what is objectively true about reality, because who effing knows, but about in terms of subjectively what's going to help get through this life. So I can kind of consolidate thoughts on it, and that helps me kind of drop in and understand what I'm learning, and it seems to help other people. And that's when I read other Substacks or other teachers. It's like I like reading that part too, and I feel like that's what writers do. That's what this book is about. Like George Saunders, like that's what I like the being able to experience the fruit of that, and be in that process. It's enormously helpful, and it probably accelerates my own insight process in a certain way. But what doesn't always work well about, or um, I think that there's a thing about, I think there's, I think that people have this reified idea of creativity as being this all good thing. Like creativity, it's about getting in touch with your creativity and expressing your creativity, and as if that could only and ever always be a good thing.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure about that. As someone who's bipolar, when I'm in my hypomanic place and I get there fairly quickly, it can happen. It happens very suddenly. Nature of it, like the parietal part of the brain that's supposed to create oversight around the arousal, not working properly, and all of a sudden, boom, there's this compulsive creative part um, that is kind of deranged, and it's deranged in the sense that it's not appropriate necessarily to the moment. It's filled with its own um, it's very interesting. It's filled with a sense of its own self-importance in a weird way. I see that a lot on Substack. When people write about an important subject, you can see that it's like they take on this grandiosity as if they themselves are now important because they're writing about this important topic. And I feel that too. And I also, just as an interesting thing is for meditators here, if anyone's done insight meditation where you've really gone into a deep mindfulness practice and on retreat and this kind of thing, there's often a kind of cycling that happens where you start by building up some momentum. The creativity, you could say, is starting to come. There's this period of real insights and breakthroughs, and then there's this period of real challenge. And the problem is this period of insights and breakthroughs, there's actually a term for it in the insight process. They call it the corruptions of insight. It's so addictive to creativity. You're so grandiose. You have so many creative ideas. I've got books and books written of journal entries from these tiny little hand notes of all the creative breakthroughs I'm having, but it's all up my own ass. Like it's not, it doesn't mean it's not good stuff, but it's so
Yeah.
infused with the sense of your own importance, your egoic derangements that, and I think that I see a lot of creativity like that. Doesn't mean it's not cathartic or good or valuable, but I myself have been in that stream, and I think it's interesting to notice that or to talk about that too. Um, and even in like the world of like spirituality, where people are like, "Oh, I just channeled this book, and I just like got quiet, and this is what poured through," and wonderful.
Yeah.
There is so much wisdom there, and what matters maybe is how much it's helping people or whatever. And there can be beautiful writing that gets channeled, and beautiful sonnets and beautiful uh, poems, and they do happen, like in great pieces of music. And there's stuff that gets that's like terrible, or I
Yeah.
mean, and even if there's some truth of it, it's not. It might be true in some way, but it's not good timing. It's not actually aesthetically good. I mean, you need the human in there, the containment, the oversight, the editor to go, okay, is this something that actually needs to be expressed? Is this
Yeah.
really and that I
Yeah.
think that you can't, I sometimes think of it as between like the cosmic dreamer and like the humanistic editor. The cosmic dreamer is just like, this is what pouring through reality. It's just vomiting out this stream. And if you are, and if there's a lot of, if that particular nervous system has a lot of experience in writing or in music or in whatever, then it can be quite refined and aesthetically beautiful, but almost always there's going to be a need for the oversight of the id that you've internalized by your culture, or the super ego you've internalized by your culture, to kind of look at it and go, is this right? Is this the right thing to
Yeah.
put out there? Or is this actually any good? Is this, as opposed to just like, hey, whatever I vomit out there, here world, take it, take my
Take it.
multicolored thing, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. As you were talking, I was thinking about how I've met certain groups of personalities in the last several years and over the years, I guess, in creatives that I work with. And there's this. Okay, nobody tell anybody this. This is my secret test. So my secret test to help folks figure out um, is I ask if they can orient toward the reader and consider where the reader's sitting, and just asking them to imagine like that person there and reading it, their inner response to whether or not they want to consider a reader, whether the reader is something they can take in this creative space,
Uh,
it tells us something about what's ready to go out.
uh,
And it's not a matter of judging, it's a matter of like um opening the cavern a little bit to go what's because I think what you're describing is very common for a lot of folks is that I've got this burst of
uh,
inspiration, but am I am I am I pushing it out when it actually was just meant for me? And there's a curious thing that publishing does when you have even a small readership. Um, it asks you if you care about that person on the other end and your relationship with that. It's an interesting test, and like I said, it's not to judge
oh
someone;
yeah.
it's to help them kind of build in their own internal editor
I love it.
more
Well, I
often.
mean, I actually, I think like you're talking about ethics in a way. There's like an ethical piece in there that's really valuable. You know, it's reminding me of a very famous framing that is attributed to the Buddha about around right speech. You know, which is
Mhm.
around. I mean, you probably know it. I'm not like Mr. Super Buddhist at all, but I've always really loved this. And it's not just. It's like when you're deciding whether to say something, is it true? Yes, but also, is it helpful, and is it good timing? I really like those two. It's like, is it
Yes.
actually helpful, and is it good timing? Because even if
Yes.
it's helpful to say this thing, like, but not right now, and it's like it's interesting to think about the responsibility of the writer to the readers in that way. Um, you know, you can't know. You have a bigger. It's one thing to say this from one person to one
Yeah.
person
Yeah.
versus to an audience. I think it's still relevant to ask, because there's good timing in the culture around things that's clear, and then there's the helpfulness too. And not all writing needs to be quote helpful. I mean, that's one of the ways in
Yeah.
which I think fiction writing and nonfiction writing and poetry is much more interesting and rich a medium than the guided meditation. The guided meditation is soteriological, or however you pronounce that. It's like it wants to help you, it wants to save you in some way, or not save you is not the right word, but that's the, in a sense, it comes from the place of wanting to help. Whereas the in a way of the mandate of a poem is much broader and more honest. It's just like to be real about being human, and to and it might make you uncomfortable. It might make you, not that you can't do that in guided meditation too, but I don't know. My ADHD is probably taking me in
Yeah.
a few different directions
Yeah.
here.
No, I think what you're describing is something I interviewed actually one of my earlier interviews for Cave of the Heart. And I'm sharing this because I think folks will enjoy hearing this. What you're describing is what Nancy Reddy called her editor told her, stop ending everything with jazz hands. Because she was moving from poetry and from poetry into prose, and her editor just kept saying like you have to finish the conclusion for readers. Like poetry is the open-ended vastness, and you can give them jazz hands there, but in this space we bring things to an ending, and I've just never forgotten that. I think that's what you're describing there is like there's a place for that, but it's not necessarily always the most nourishing or beneficial. So, anyways, I like that. I feel like we could keep going for a little while on that train. But I think I'm mindful of the time here, and I'm curious about um like what do you wish more creators understood about like this inner life, especially if like they don't yet have an audience, or maybe Substack is the first space they've had an audience. I think there's a new term going around called your Substack native. It's like your audience grew here. That there's a lot of interesting stories of people figuring out what it means to have an audience that listens. And yeah,
Yeah.
just what would you share with them about how to navigate?
Well, I mean, a lot of, I think it's a lot of, there's a lot of medicine on this forum and in every forum. And I think you have to kind of
Mm,
see it as it's about connection. Like you don't have to, it's healthy and deeply fulfilling to be able to express who you are. First of all, there's just healing straight up in that, to
yeah.
learn to be okay with that, to be involved in the process of getting ever more honest, which is an insight process. It's profound. And the more honest you are, the more you create that possibility for others to do the same thing. And the more authentic you are, the bigger, the deeper the transmission. That is absolutely real. You feel it when anyone's just being honest in a group about something, how they're feeling, or when you're doing that. And so there's the straight up, just the medicine of being real and being honest, as being, the world needs more of that. And, um, we're all going to be in our own little ecosystems, and different people are going to connect to different people. So you would need lots of voices if there's just one voice out there, it would be the worst thing in the world. It would be,
Yeah.
I don't even know what that would be like, basically like maybe the 1600s or something. You have to so it's like, it's okay to have to just be one person speaking to one person, or one person here speaking to 20 people. It's like, because it's always like that. Someone's going to be attracted to where you're at in some way. It gives you, so there's this, I like the idea that it's happening at multiple levels exponentially, these
Mhm.
nested dialogues where everyone's kind of in their own ecosystem, and everyone in a way is learning to be ever more honest, real, clear, whatever it is. Like there's
Yeah.
a learning in the writing. I like writing that's transparent about its own learning. I've always
Yeah.
liked that in
Yeah.
journalism. Like it was so rare to find a journalist who would admit to being wrong about something. You would never. It's like it was
Yeah.
like, I remember when Malcolm Gladwell got, he wrote some essay about something, and about, I think it was between U.S. and Canadian healthcare, comparing it, and then at some point he changed his mind about what he wrote. He said, "Oh yeah, I've changed my mind about that," and all these people were attacking him. And I remember thinking, that's awesome. You never see that happen, And so to be honest about where you're learning, where you're like, oh, got that wrong, I think is really, it's just, that's medicine too for everyone, especially in this time where it's like everyone's so stridently got to be this way and have it like this and be right and you're wrong. And, um, so those are just some very, I think it's great. I mean, honestly, the idea that everybody could be out there with their own, like, expressing themselves wherever that makes sense for them. And I think it's healing for the culture. And I would say, pay attention to what's coming through. Is it, those three things about the right timing, is it good? Is it helpful? Is it right timing? Those are interesting questions. And I kind of try to ask around that. There's certain things I've written that I haven't published yet, and I may never publish because I just was like, this is not the right timing for the culture, or this might, or too confusing, or whatever it is. And there's actually lots of those, like dozens and dozens of those drafts.
Yeah. Yeah. Same here. I follow it until I know there's a brick wall that says it doesn't meet my criteria. Like, and I have surrendered that to like the muscles you have to work to find the right thing. But I don't think if I was 22, I would feel very good about how many second, third, and fourth drafts I've pulled. Sorry, it's not crossing the threshold. I can't do it. So, um, well, I really, I'm mindful of the time. We have like about 5 minutes left of what we kind of allotted, and I just wonder if there are any questions in the mix that you want to ask about creativity. We kind of went more like Substack specific, which is pretty cool actually, because I mean, this is where I learned to unmask. As an autistic person, I had never used my voice. I'd always been behind the scenes as an editor. So, like, Substack is a place where I can tell you the truth about like what you're going to experience if you've been in a certain mode of publishing or writing. But it's a good. When I say good, I don't mean always positive, but it's good. It's good, rewarding. So, um, yeah. see if nobody has questions, I will send them off to your newsletter. To
Yeah, if anyone here on the live wants to, is that what you mean? Like,
Yeah, if
anyone
anybody
listening?
yeah, if anybody wants to, this is how you type on a keyboard. If anybody wants to type, um, feel free to drop it in the comments. Um, let's see. I'm gonna try and get this. So Phoebe shared, it was you, Jeff, who introduced me to Substack, which led me on in so many ways, not just with you, but with all sorts of people. It brings me to life with parts of my life which have been missing. More than meditation, which is not entirely your point, but other interests. I talk to people who help me along with starting something new in my life. Listening to you both right now is that. Oh, hearing you both now saying the most relevant things is my point. Oh, thanks. Thanks, Phoebe.
Amazing.
It's so nice. Hmm. I think my inner editor is trying to figure out like how I'm going to organize this into a replay because
This is only the second Subtech live I've done. I'm about to do a whole bunch more of them with Dan next month with Dan Harris because he has a Substack, and
yeah, yeah.
so it's good for me to see how it all works. And
Yeah,
um,
well, I'm glad we brought you on here, and yeah, we'll be doing more Cave of the Hearts and just trying to do one or two a month because, as we can see, we deep dive quite a bit, and I feel like more than two would be water hosing my my readers with with the depth. So, okay, well, it looks like folks are kind of quiet, and I feel kind of quiet. I feel like I'll have a lot to reflect on my drive home. So I just want to say thank you. Whenever I reach out to you in my head, I say my friend Jeff. Um, hello, my friend Jeff, and then I delete it from the text. I say
you can say my friend Jeff. We're
my friend
friends.
Jeff. Thanks. I will do that. Well, my friend Jeff, thank you for being here again. In the show notes, I'll put everything down there about how you can find Jeff. I feel like the thing that people miss about Substack is that you can get access to people who are
Right.
doing real discovery based work on
Yeah.
Substack. Substack is a place that I find lots of people are using as an incubator, and there's something very accessible that Substack creates. And so, if you're
Mm,
someone who's been wanting to dive more deeply, it's just easier to do that now, like with what you
mm.
offer in your newsletter. So, if you're interested in more conversations like this, you can also subscribe to my newsletter because I talk
I
about
recommend it.
how we publish from our own voice with our own confidence. I want people publishing confidently, and I want to teach you how. So, um, yeah, this has been Cave of the Heart. Yeah, thanks for joining
Thanks,
us.
everyone. Thanks,
Yeah,
everybody. Thank you, Amanda. Super fun to do with.
thank you. Thank you. All right, see you now next time. Bye.